that's
All right, I think we got it.
Okay, now we're live. All right.
Good afternoon and welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for your patience.
Go ahead, Eddie.
Good afternoon and welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for your patience with our technical difficulties. My name is Eddie Westerman, and I work in WEA Communications. As we begin today, let's start by recognizing that while we're meeting virtually, most of us are joining from around Washington State on the traditional lands of 29 federally recognized Native American tribes and many more Native American tribes that have not been federally recognized. Our WEA headquarters building is located on lands where the Coast Salish, Duwamish, Muckleshoot, and Puyallup tribes have lived. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations, and we commit to continuing to learn how we can be better stewards of the land we inhabit. Our continuing resolution A5, passed by the delegates of the 1985 WEA Representative Assembly and revised by the 2019 delegation, states, we believe that education has historically served as a tool for the colonization and assimilation of Native peoples. And as educators, we have a responsibility to share the rich history and the traditions of this region's original inhabitants with the students whom we serve. Our Washington Education Association President Larry Delaney is here with us today. Additionally, we have on our panel of experts, WEA General Counsel Amy Iverson, our bargaining specialist, Jennifer Selves, our funding lobbyist, Laurel Knorr, our special education lead, Annie Lamberto, and our new Director of Government Relations, Jabril Diop. We are also pleased to have Elizabeth McDougall from Terp Sign Language Services supporting us today. If you have a question, send it to wea@washingtonea.org. Please include a theme or topic in the subject line and your name and local in the email. We anticipate being live for somewhere between 30 and 60 minutes today, depending on the number of questions we receive and the level of interest. The meeting is being recorded and will be posted on WEA's website at www.washingtonea.org following our session. If there are questions we can't get to during this meeting, and we have answers for them, we will post those on our website in the coming days. Having said that, remember that the situation is fluid and there's still a lot of questions for which we don't have answers. Before we begin with questions, we have some updates from WEA President Larry Delaney. Larry?
Thanks, Eddie. And I'll just echo what Eddie said. I recognize that we all want clarity for the confusion that swirls around us right now with the school year set to begin for most of our locals in less than 6 weeks. There's a lot of anxiety among our members, and I just want to make sure I put that out in the room and that that's heard and that's recognized. A couple of weeks ago, honestly, I have lost track of time through this. It may have been 10 days, I'm not sure, but I asked members to give me their concerns and give me their thoughts for the start of the school year. And a shout out to our members. I received over 2,000 emails from members, and I applaud your candor and your honesty, and really applaud you sharing your expertise as we talk about and we look at what a return to school needs to entail to ensure that that our educators are safe, our students are safe, our families are safe, and our communities are safe. Some of the common themes that emerged from those emails was just an overall concern about members returning to the actual physical school buildings. And many of you shared stories about poor ventilation in your buildings and the inability to socially distance in your workspaces. Heard lots of concern from members around districts not adequately preparing for what distance learning may look like. Most districts are involved right now in planning for some sort of a hybrid model, but very little looking forward to what distance learning may look like. There's concern that came forward about the lack of focus on racial and social and economic justice for our students, our members, our families, and our communities as well. And a bunch of questions related to potential leave issues related to COVID-19. So once again, I want to share my thanks for all of our members who shared their thoughts and feelings with me. Since March, WEA has been consistent and clear with our messaging. We have, from the get-go, prioritized the health and safety of our members. We want to make sure that all of the work we do looks at solutions through a racial and social and economic equity lens. We need to ensure that that our staff are safe, and more so than just classroom educators. We recognize that whatever schooling and learning is going to look like in the fall, it's going to take all educators to be able to put forth the education and the learning that all of our students need. Lastly, we want to make sure that all of our educators are supported, and so that messaging has been consistent. When we surveyed our members late last spring, what we found is that over 70% of our members said that they needed some additional professional development in order to be the best virtual instructors or distance educators that they can be. And we've heard that messaging. In fact, just minutes ago, literally, your WEA board passed a policy position statement regarding a return to school this fall. That will be shared with all of our members this afternoon. That will be posted on our website, shared through our social media avenues, shared with media, as well as our state's elected officials. And as a part of that policy, we are calling on Governor Inslee to continue leading with science and safety, and declare that with very few exceptions, our schools are going to be open for remote learning this fall. We believe that the time is now. The science is clear. We can see where this virus is headed and where it's trending, and we need to ensure that in this state we continue to do what we have done throughout, and that is lead with safety and lead with science. We recognize that the coronavirus is putting our whole school community at risk. We recognize that transmission rates are getting worse. They're not getting better. And because of that, the time is now to prepare for quality distance learning. As I mentioned, we need to ensure that all of our planning and preparation addresses racial, social, and economic justice issues. And we recognize that we are going to have to collaborate, not only with our elected officials, but with our school districts as well. And that through collaboration and bargaining, we are going to be able to find the solutions necessary to serve all of our students and all of our communities. And most importantly, the time to act is now. It's not 2 weeks from now, it's not 4 weeks from now, but the time to act is now. So with that, I would like to turn it back to our host for this teletown hall, Eddie Westerman.
Thank you, Larry. Here's a reminder, if you have questions, please email them to wea@washingtonea.org. Our first question is for Jennifer Silves, WEA Bargaining Specialist. WEA has just said it favors starting school with distance learning and not in the buildings. But from the bargaining perspective, what if my local has already come to agreements with my district? Or what if my district is set on starting with in-person school?
Eddie, thank you for the question. So first of all, I'm not aware of any local that has completed finalizing all the details to how any restart to learning will look in the fall of 2020. In addition, this is an ever-changing situation. We know that we're in a different place than we were just 2 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. And so we have to know that this is going to be somewhat ongoing in terms of where we're looking at things. I do know many districts have released statements about models they're going to be using to provide instruction. And that's just one piece of all of this. And so as you're hearing about that, I would be cautious as to thinking that it means that the bargaining behind that is finalized. Just this week, just yesterday and earlier this week, we've seen a number of Puget Sound school districts announce that they will be starting the year with remote learning. And so we do know that even if you've had some other plan announced, there's a chance that it will change. It's important to recognize that many of the pieces that impact working conditions, which is all of our, anything related to working conditions is bargainable. But certificated and classified employees is bargainable. So that educators' daily schedules, work schedules, time to transition, communication, engagement time with families, the school calendar, start and end days to the year, like when you're going to start, any breaks that might happen, any professional development that would take place, how days of lost instruction may be made up for with both short-term and long-term closures, what the duties and responsibilities of a particular employee group look like. Those are all things that are going to need to be looked at, and some of them are going to need to be looked at creatively, but they have to be bargained. We have been encouraging locals to reach out to members, and we're encouraging members to reach out to their local union leadership as they think about issues that would help them support their teaching and their learning of their students, as well as thinking about what kinds of concerns they have in regards to those work conditions. If your district has been making, so even if you think that decisions are all the way done, again, as Larry points out, things are constantly changing. And if your district has been making decisions without input and is set on starting school in person, we need to be organizing in those communities, and as educators working to figure out how we unify your voice with those of parents and community members to share the concerns and push school board members and district leaders to make the right decision. Research and transmission rates, mobility rates for your county are things to look at and to research around what is needed as we move forward. So it's not a done deal. We still have a lot of work to do ahead of us. Eddie?
Thank you. Our next question is for Larry. How does WEA plan on supporting efforts to protect jobs for our ESP members if we aren't doing in-person education in the buildings? Additionally, what about specialists like music, PE, art teachers?
And if I had $1 for every time I've been muted, my apologies. Thanks, Eddie, for that. One of the issues that was made very clear last spring was that there are connectivity issues all across the state. We know, if we are being honest, that with ourselves and our communities, that there's students that we did lose contact with. And so when I take a look at what a distance learning may look like in the fall, I cannot envision any sort of a model that would require fewer educators, but rather more educators. And so when we focus on that connectivity piece, so often we simply focus on broadband or internet access. But what we recognized last spring was that we lost that human connectivity piece. So I see roles for far more educators as we look at distance learning 2.0. We're going to have adults in the education system who are making daily contacts with students and families. When a student falls off the radar, we're going to have to make that personal contact. So I can see that if a district is simply looking inside the box at solutions and looking to match actual job descriptions with what the reality may be in a distance learning world that I feel we're going to be entering, they may say, we don't need these educators. But if we're being honest about what the needs truly are in a distance learning world, we in fact need more. I will also, the second part of that question related to math, I'm sorry, not math, music and the arts. You know, first of all, I'm a math teacher and probably not the best person to speak to what quality music or art education looks like. But I can say that as we're meeting right now, the state superintendent of public instruction is convening a work team that is focused on distance learning, and specifically they have brought in educators from the arts to address these particular issues. And I would expect that in the coming days, we're going to have more information regarding what that art education may look like online.
Our next question comes from Stuart Wilner in Seattle. Stuart has a number of questions, including one about training and professional development for all educators facing remote learning to be fully trained and equipped with the most successful tech tools so we can work to create stimulating and successful remote classroom environments. Do we, and I think by we, Stuart, means both district technology departments and the union, do we have plans to roll out significant training for which we should be paid or receive tri-hours to become more competent at remote learning? I think that this question can go to Laurel or Jen or both of them. Let's start with Laurel.
Hi, Stuart. Thanks for the question today. So on the funding side, locals can bargain additional days of professional learning at the district level. We know that remote learning presents new challenges for the classroom, but many of the same professional learning needs are still there, such as the need for inclusionary practices, culturally responsive remote classroom strategies, and family engagement. School districts can use state, federal, and local funds very flexibly, in most cases for professional learning, to support instructional practices and family engagement. The state currently provides funding for 3 days of professional development for certificated instructional staff, and there are 2 days of training for paraeducators as they complete their requirements for the paraeducator certification. You may remember from earlier this year that the legislature passed a new requirement for school districts to train all school district staff on racial literacy, culturally responsiveness, and stereotype threat for the purposes of closing persistent opportunity gaps during this upcoming school year. That requirement is still there. And I'll send it over to Jen now.
Jen, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, sorry. Piece about the mute button. So thanks, Laurel. And as she shared, there are resources for districts to provide this PD in terms of finances. And as we also know from what Larry said earlier, 70% of the respondents to our survey said they needed more PD. What this PD is, when this PD happens, the content, the how it's going to be presented, those are all things that are subject to bargaining because they're all working conditions. And that includes like calendaring. I've heard things from some districts that have started thinking about changing their calendars up and front loading professional development that was originally scheduled in their calendar for later in the year. By looking at ways to put that PD earlier, then we can focus on these needs around remote learning. And as Laurel pointed out, many of the needs are not different other than it's the platform of it. And so figuring out how we embed all of those pieces. So I would encourage educators to talk to districts about how to help educate, how to do that. In addition, one of the things that hasn't really been addressed and talked about, which fits into this PD category and is going to be crucial to remote learning success, is how do we help families learn? And so that might be another avenue for you to look at. And I would encourage educators to talk to districts about what supports they need to be able to help their families and what kind of professional development and what kind of learning family learning might be able to take place in collaboration with those with their parents and the families for the children's education.
Thank you, Jen. Our next question is from Amanda in Spokane. And Amanda says, now that we have this resolution, did I just lose you? Now that we have this resolution, what are we going to do about it? This is the now what question. Is WEA taking any actions now that we've passed that? We'll pass that to Larry.
Thanks, Eddie, and Amanda, thanks for that question. So, our hope is that first and foremost, by passing this resolution, we will help to refocus the planning of many of our school districts. 6 or 8 weeks ago, districts began looking at the very real possibility of remote learning or some sort of a hybrid model for the fall. And many of them put blinders on and strictly focused on that hybrid model. And that was very clear in the comments that I received and the messaging that I received from our members. So what we want to do with this position, first and foremost, is ensure that, one, we can begin to work with the governor's office to get some sort of a statement that will take the decision away from local districts. But secondly, ensure that if that doesn't happen in a timely manner, that we look forward and we're working with our local districts to begin planning for that distance model. And really, that planning needed to start yesterday. So we need to put the pressure there. The reality is, when we take a look at the structure of WEA across the state, is the overwhelming majority of the decisions that are made are going to be made at the local level. They're going to be bargained with your local and your district administration. And our hope is that by putting this statement out, this provides guidance, not just in Spokane, where you are, Amanda, but all over the state for our locals to take to the table and begin to focus those conversations on where we believe the start of the school year is going to be. And that's with a virtual or a distance model for the overwhelming majority of our districts.
Thank you, Larry. Our next question is from Linda Pendleton in North Kitsap. I think it's going to be for Jen. What happens to district employed bus drivers if schools don't reopen for in-person learning?
Linda, that's a great question, because I know that makes everyone a little nervous when they think about what their traditional jobs look like. But this last spring, we saw many different districts look at things and have the opportunity to have bus drivers for specific find different opportunities to provide services to families. And for some of our educators in the classified ranks, this is going to look a lot different. What their work looks like in the fall of 2020 may look different in a remote setting or even in a hybrid setting as we go forward. So whatever it looks like, we're going to have to figure those things out. We've seen bus drivers provide food service delivery, material delivery, even Wi-Fi delivery. So I think there are ways that we can strategize and be creative about how we make sure we have opportunities to utilize the amazing educators that we have to make those connections that Larry referred to earlier. These are all things that are going to need to be decided through the bargaining process, and we are not going to need less adults to do all of this work. We are going to need more. And again, it's going to be a bargainable thing. The other thing to keep in mind is that we want to make sure we talk to districts about the specialized skills that many of our classified employees have. Bus drivers have a unique skill set and training, and in many regions of the state we have shortages. So for school districts to just lay people off and risk losing them when we will need them is problematic, and they need to be thinking both long-term and short-term as we look forward. This is a time for us to help districts have that vision and not get mired down in such specific details.
And Larry, I think you said you had something to add to this.
Yeah, and I just want to piggyback on what Jen said there. When we look at the needs of school districts to have educators, and when I'm talking educators, I'm talking bus drivers, paraeducators, office support workers, food service workers, as well as our classroom teachers as well. There is a need for educators to be able to make those connections. And regardless of what role someone plays in the public education system, there is going to be a role for them to play in as we move forward in a distance learning model.
Our next question is from Lori Burns, who is a music specialist in Tacoma Education Association. How can we get help for the special needs students who are probably struggling the most for care, like occupational therapy, physical therapy, and for education and other needs? Annie?
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I would like to kind of couch and ground this question in law, and to reiterate what others have been saying. Things are constantly fluid, and we are receiving guidance, periodically, and things change. But as of right now, and what we do know is IDEA is the law, the federal law that governs special education, and a crucial component of that law is that districts are obligated to provide a free, appropriate public education for students with disabilities. And they do that by offering an IEP that is going to confer benefit, that a student would benefit from that IEP. That law has not changed. The regulations have not changed. And so a district, even now, is obligated to provide an offer of FAPE through that IEP. And the expectation is that those IEP services will be provided. What is kind of in flux is that districts are still making decisions around those delivery service models. And so how those services are going to be delivered are going to be dependent on those decisions. I do want to point out the most recent guidance from OSPI, Special Services Division, was from July 10th. And throughout that document, it is asking districts to prioritize in-person education for students with disabilities. That again was written and it was 2 to 3 weeks ago, and things were very different. The other thing I want to really point out is that it all we have to individualize. So the expectation is that even if a district is providing full remote services, there may be students who individually cannot make progress on their IEP goals. And that's going to have to be taken on a case-by-case basis. Lastly, I'd like to just add that specifically around our ESA personnel, our SLPs, OTs, psychs, there isn't anything in the Professional Education Standards Board's regulation that would prevent those Washington educator roles from delivering services virtually. So an SLP can service students remotely, so can an OT and a PT. And again, those decisions will have to be made individually.
Thank you, Annie. This is a question from Anna Melissa, who works in Whatcom County, and she says, if my district follows through with a hybrid plan and an option to learn remote only, or a remote phase-in slowly plan, how am I, as a teacher, supposed to come up with plans for all of this? Unsupported remote learning with a paper backup was hard enough. I'm not trained or experienced to teach remotely, nor has my district set up any lesson support. I think this is a Jen question.
First of all, Anna Melissa, you're not alone with this struggle. I would imagine there are many on the call here today that would agree with you. that there is much to learn and think through as we look at the real and almost certain possibility that we're revisiting remote continuous learning. And that doesn't matter whether or not we've had you're in a district where they've already committed to that, or whether or not there's in person. The chances of us having some time during this year can go back to remote learning are very high. And it seems like that during this planning, as Larry alluded to earlier, districts are getting mired down in details around plans without looking at kind of the foundational piece that every plan that has something to do with remote needs us to have more support provided for our educators, because it's not our typical model. Our educators know how to teach in person, and yes, in person may look different than it did, but it's still in person. And this remote piece is just full of different technology needs and strategies for engaging students, and that we have to find ways to help our families be able to provide some supports that would typically come from other places. And how do we do that work so that we can be collaborative partners with our students and with our families for all of the learning that takes place. This is going to take PD. So it goes back to one of those earlier questions. And when our districts are failing to see the importance of that, we have to help them understand that. So if you have not already started those conversations, start, shaking things loose. Make sure you are communicating. Districts have the resources to provide the learning opportunities. We have to go in and bargain those, and we have to be vocal about what is needed. When we do that, that's how we get things done. Again, every district's a little different here, so we're going to need to do this locally and through those conversations at the bargaining table.
Great, thank you. Our next couple of questions are substitute teacher questions. The first one is from Richard Taylor in Bonnie Lake, and he says, how will substitute teachers fit in the plan this fall? If subs choose only to work virtual, what will be the way that they will have to be accessible to the information to cover the class for the day?
Eddie, did you want me to take that one?
Yeah, take that one, and then I'll ask the next one, and let's just split these up. Go ahead, Jen.
Okay, so on this one, I think it's a really good question, and it may have different answers depending upon what local you're in, and what the unions, what the regular contract looks like for that local in the district. WEA has been encouraging locals to work with districts about what will happen with substitute teachers during all parts of COVID. And I would also say that OSPI, the Department of Health and Labor and Industry guidance is clear that they expect that all individuals working in schools will have access to the same trainings and around health and safety protocols. So that's another piece to make sure that our substitute employees are brought up to speed on whatever health and safety protocols are out there. In addition, it seems rational and reasonable that if districts are expecting a substitute to provide instruction, that they all in a format that is not typical, remote learning is not typical, that they're going to include those individuals who may need to provide that. And so making sure that we're bargaining the inclusion of substitutes in any training, making sure that there's access to Wi-Fi and other technology tools, software, will be very important. And it's no different than in-person instruction, that substitutes need to have the means to do the work. We can't ask them to be the person instructing if we don't give them the tools. This can all be bargained. And then in addition, there are some protections out there, but I think that kind of gets into the next parts. So,
which is, if there isn't sufficient work, will substitutes be able to file for unemployment or something else to make up difference from last year? Anne from Seattle says that we can't take another job that is applying for and accepting as a condition of unemployment and still be available to substitutes. So how might that work, Laurel?
Well, substitutes can now qualify for unemployment under the new pandemic unemployment insurance program, and that provides up to 39 weeks of benefits. Currently, the requirement to report weekly that you've been actively searching for a new job has been waived. But as the economy starts to open up a little bit more broadly, that waiver may go away. So at this time, there's not that requirement. And just as a reminder, that additional $600 per week of pandemic assistance ends at the end of this week. That benefit made unemployment insurance a full wage replacement instead of a partial wage replacement program. And there's hope that Congress may reinstate that in a different form in the next COVID-19 relief package. But we're really going to have to wait and see how that turns out. And when that happens, there could be some new requirements or less requirements.
Okay, our next question is from Julian from Spokane. And Julian says, I am a current high school Spanish teacher in Spokane Public Schools. As of May 21st, I finished a year plus of cancer treatments for brain cancer that was detected in January of 2019. I returned to teaching I returned to teaching work and sending my kids back to school as I'm still immune compromised. Is there any job security for employees like me who find ourselves in compromised positions but need work to survive? Jen, I think that would be you.
Yeah. Julian, first of all, my heart goes out to you, and I applaud your courage, and I send good thoughts for continued success with beating cancer. Next, so oftentimes there are health conditions that may exist that typically would not make it so that we struggle with going to work and doing our job in a normal circumstance. But we're not in normal circumstance times, we're in COVID times. And due to that, some of those same health conditions that have been identified as high risks for COVID will qualify under ADA for accommodations. So Julian and others who might be in a similar situation, one of the things that you may want to consider is whether or not you request an accommodation, an ADA accommodation based on that health condition and its the high risk likelihood for COVID. Those ADA accommodations are available for the health condition pieces of that. They're not available for age. So the age part we have to deal with in a different way, but anything related to ADA with those health pieces could be a part of that. And so that could be something like a remote an opportunity to work remotely, which is a reasonable accommodation. So accommodations have to be reasonable. The district doesn't have to give you exactly what you ask for, but they have to work with you. And so we would encourage you to work with your local association to be able to look for what that might look like. In addition, if that's not possible, there are leaves available. There are a variety of different leave options. We've also been encouraging locals to bargain different types of leave benefits that might expand opportunities for our members who might need them during these difficult times. And then the last part that is a protection here in terms of job security is the governor put out a proclamation back in April around high-risk employees and their jobs being protected. These three things are the floor. They're not the ceiling of these in terms of rights and opportunities to help provide support and economic job security. And so we also know that many locals are looking for other ways to support our members in these areas.
Okay, the next question is from Federal WEA Office Manager Stephanie, and she says, paraeducators who work less than 12 months in Federal Way public schools were recently advised to apply for unemployment with all of the uncertainty this fall. How do you apply for unemployment without having been laid off? Does this mean that we will not have paras for online learning, even though that we may have that in some teacher contracts? Laurel?
Thanks, Stephanie, for the question. Lots of questions about unemployment because our unemployment system, through these multiple bills that have been passed by Congress to respond to the pandemic, have really changed the allowable ability for people to claim unemployment benefits. So for employees without the certainty of work in the fall, you could be eligible for unemployment. The Employment Security Department has indicated that school districts cannot demonstrate a reasonable assurance of returning in the fall unless someone has a continuing contract. So that is typically for our certificated instructional staff and a little bit less for the classified staff, until the district has formally adopted its reopening plan and then filed that plan with the state. So we have these reopening plans that are happening. First, they're filed with the local health jurisdiction, and then they go to OSPI. So after that plan's filed, an ongoing determination would be adopted about that plan, and your employment status would be known by the beginning of the school year. So for this uncertain time, all of those words put together, for this uncertain time, you would be able to apply. Once the district has their plan, knows what they're doing, then you would be able to either move into regular unemployment if they don't bring you back, or if they do bring you back, then you would come off of unemployment. So if your collective bargaining agreement has a requirement for additional ESP classroom support, then that classroom support should still be provided in a remote environment because that workload did not go away. We've heard Jen say a couple times that it takes more staff, not less staff. Regardless of what type of instruction you're providing, remote, in person, or hybrid, we're in the middle of a pandemic and students really need that help. So locals should ensure the provision of this contract is maintained.
Okay, our next question comes from Anne, and she is in Seattle. And she says, so many educators are worried about how to balance everything as they try to work with their own children. I'm wondering about support for teachers with kids and others who work in our schools with kids. If we are teaching remotely, I heard that it is possible that we may be teaching from our buildings. If that is true, I'm not sure how my children, who are in first grade and sixth grade, will be able to go through their school day without support from parents. My husband is working too. Jen, will you take that question?
Sure. So this is a great question, Anne, and one that I imagine every parent is wrestling with around the state and the country, both educators and non-educators alike. We know that from this past spring that typical school days may not be the best ways to address student and family needs, both for our own students, as you have pointed out, you're a first and sixth grader, and students of parents who might be working outside of public schools. The normal times that school runs and the way in which that model may need to look different depending upon what type of instructional structure is in place in a district. The benefits of being a part of a union is that we can work together to figure out and bargain supports to make those challenges work. And things that we might, that I've heard places consider are things like district provided childcare or flexible scheduling around the models, or a different model or cohorting that allows for some asynchronous learning combined with synchronous live time at times that parents might be able to know is going to happen, but also provides the educator some flexibility to meet students outside of a typical school day and therefore help their own children be able to do work. Finding solutions is going to take everyone working together, and we may have different solutions depending upon where people are at. This is going to be one of those things where if you've got an idea that you think will work sharing that with your local union leadership so that as they're at the bargaining table, they can explore that and think about ways to make it happen will be important. In addition, if for some reason there's not an ability to make a schedule work, there is leave available through for individuals through the Families First Act that was passed last spring. That stays in place through December of 2020. It may be something that is possible. And I would point out that unions can help you access that, but it's also a point where I would say districts need to be thinking about how they're going to creatively solve these problems and work with educators and families so that they have enough staff to provide the instruction and the resources for students and the parents who are trying to balance work schedules and supporting their own student learning.
Thank you, Jen. So Carolyn in Cheney says, how specifically will the district or schools respond to students who do unsafe things? Example, take off their masks and delay or refuse to put it back on, refuse to wear the mask properly, or what about students who jokingly cough on another person, other kinds of behavior like that? What will the protocol be? How will the district handle staff who do not follow safety requirements? I believe most of us have witnessed adults wearing masks below their noses or outright refusing to wear one, and have had experiences with people who believe the virus is a political hoax. Amy, want to field that one?
Sure. This is the number one concern I think that educators have going into the school buildings whenever that does happen. How on earth are they going to keep kids wearing those masks? The reality is that our Department of Labor and Industries has required all employees or all employers to follow certain rules, including making sure everyone wears masks, practice social distancing, proper hand hygiene. That applies to school buildings as well. In addition, the governor has passed a mandate that everyone is to wear a mask when they are out in public. That applies equally to school buildings, to both children and adults. Now, we do recognize that there are a group of individuals who can't wear masks for health conditions or very young children. And those are going to be difficult situations that we'll just have to deal with. But what protections are in place is if you are in a building and you see that students aren't wearing masks or your colleagues aren't wearing masks, the Department of Labor and Industries gives you the right to refuse to perform work under unsafe conditions. But there's some caveats to that. You can't just leave the job site. You have to bring your complaint forward to your employer, and it has to be a reasonable concern, and then give an opportunity for the issue to be corrected. Now, because it's such a kind of a broad standard and it relies on enforcement by a state agency, if you go the complaint route, what we're doing is we're working with Jen Silvis on bargaining language that will specify what does that process look like? Who do you complain to? Who's going to come supervise your class while that's being worked out? You have the right to union representation. All of those issues should be bargained at the local level, but there is an overarching legal protection against having to perform work under unsafe conditions.
Amy, as long as we have you, I'm going to ask one more question for you. This comes from Tracy in Vancouver. Do parents or guardians have a legal right to file a civil lawsuit for damages if they believe a teacher or a staff member exposed their child to COVID-19, leading to illness or death of their child? What guarantee or legal protection do we have to say that that won't happen?
Well, parents do have the right to sue school districts and educators for what they believe is harm caused to their child. Washington is one of the few states that actually do allow people to sue a governmental entity, including districts. The reality, though, is, let's say the suit's brought against the individual teacher. That's very rare because usually they're going to be looking for money, and the district's where the money's at. But individuals are sometimes named, and so the district will have the obligation to indemnify and represent the individual teacher in any lawsuit. And if they refuse to do that for whatever reason, which seems crazy to me because they're liable for whatever their employees do, that's where the NEA Educators Employment Liability Insurance Program kicks in. That's what all WEA members have access to, and it provides up to $1 million coverage for civil lawsuits brought against individuals where the district has not taken over representation. So there is protection there.
Thank you, Amy. So Tara in Richland has a question about working remotely. She says, I would like the right to teach remotely from my classroom if that is the route we're going to take this fall. I have access to all of my materials, including reliable internet. At home, my family has to share the internet for my job, my husband's job, and my son's college classes. Every Zoom meeting has glitches. I've had to use Chromebook for my school. I also feel like it's an invasion of my privacy. If I'm the only one in my classroom and there are only 12 teachers in my modular, can't I safely and conveniently work in my professional space? Jen?
So in the spring, this is a great question, Tara, because in the spring, things were very different than they are now in regards to what kinds of actions had been taken by the governor. So in the spring, school buildings were closed, which was part of having limited to no access to them. And then in addition, we did have places where bus drivers and stuff were able to help provide materials that you're describing to get them out to our families and stuff. But there's still many educators and students who struggled with that connectivity and resources to do their best teaching and learning. And so currently, the school building closure has been lifted, and since remote instruction is not a typical instructional model, and these are extraordinary times, what the workday and structure looks like will require districts to meet first the guidance for safe and healthy work environments outlined by the Department of Health and Labor and Industries. And then in addition to, once they've met those, they're going to have to bargain what those working conditions look like for educators while implementing remote learning of any type, and that's going to need to be bargained. This might include like what kind of access will educators have to materials, options of where work might take place, what that daily schedule looks like, and then different pieces along those. Developing the protocols around the safety, the calendars, the work schedules, all need to be part of that bargaining conversation, and ultimately any agreement that is reached between the union and the district.
Okay, next question is from Teresa on Vashon Island. She says, my caseload language makes the assumption that I am able to group students. During distance learning, I was not able to do that given the age and severity of the children with whom I work. Given the teachers will be given a reduced class size, at least in my district, will there be support and guidance from WEA to reduce the caseloads for special education staff as well? That's a Jen question, I think.
It is, Eddie. Teresa, these types of things, caseloads, class size, those are all part of working conditions. And as such, they're bargainable. And they're bargained at the local level. And that's for all certificate groups and all groups of employees, including our special education teachers, our educational support associates, which is SLPs, OTs, PTs. And so just as social distancing is going to push a requirement that class sizes more than likely in a lot of places will need to be reduced because of space constraints, it's going to be problematic for our ESAs and special education teachers. And so it's going to be a topic that needs to be looked at. How that gets supported and mitigated is going to be handled differently at every particular local, depending upon the number of employees that you have available, FTE, and the ability to hire additional people. supports to do that. It may be a different model of instruction. It might be there might be different therapy pieces that are looked at, because there are a finite number of hours in the day to be able to work with students and to be able to complete the paperwork. So we would encourage you to work with your local as you think of strategies that might work to mitigate those things, and whether it's providing those smaller caseloads. We know that with ESAs especially, we oftentimes struggle with even hiring enough. And so how would we find other supports, and what would that look like to make sure that all of our educators have what they need to be able to provide support for their students?
Thank you, Jen. This next question is from Jerry, who is a retired educator from Olympia. And Jerry says, if schools reopen, and I'm going to add, even if we're doing remote learning, won't social emotional learning needs be just as important as content for the kids? Jerry's concerned that the kids have been traumatized in so many different ways, especially through uncertainty and loss of connectivity. Shouldn't budgeting and hiring include paraprofessionals or those trained in social work to be a part of the faculty equation, especially for kids with special needs? That could be a question for Jen, for Laurel, for Larry.
I'll go.
Who wants to take that?
So thanks, Jerry, for that question. You are right. Students must feel safe and ready to learn in the classroom, regardless of where that classroom is. And students are dealing with so much emotionally during this pandemic and need social emotional learning more than ever. School districts, communities, and locals need to all come together and prioritize this need for our students so that they're ready to learn in the classroom and have qualified, caring, competent staff available to support students. So this is where we are. There's been no funding cut to school districts. They're still receiving the same amount of funding that they were expected to receive before the pandemic hit. And there's been additional federal funding provided to school districts through the CARES Act and additional money that they can access through FEMA. So if this was a priority for your school district before, hopefully it will continue to be a priority in the pandemic. And if it wasn't, hopefully there's a way to find some different things that can happen at the school district at the bargaining table to make that happen for students.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to add on to that?
Yeah, I'll jump in here for just a second. And I think one of the things that we've all recognized is that that COVID has shined a bright light on many of the issues that existed in public education prior. And this is just one of those issues. We know that prior to this, our schools had a huge need for counselors and social workers and mental health professionals, that our educators needed more training with social emotional learning. And this pandemic has only exacerbated that. So that's a great question, Jerry, and certainly something that as we move forward and we talk about looking at this through the equity lens, certainly that needs to be a focus of any education plan moving forward, whether in person or remote.
Okay, I think we've run out of time for questions, but remember, we have all the questions you've asked, and whatever questions we can answer will be posted at www.washingtonea.org over the next few days. Larry, you started to wrap up a little bit. Do you have anything else you want to add in terms of wrapping up?
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. I think it's important to remember that this is truly a situation where we're all in this together, and this virus doesn't care whether you're in Kennewick or Colville or Bellingham or Vancouver or anywhere in between. This is impacting virtually all of our communities, and truly we're going to have to work together to put together the best plan for the education of our students and the safety of all. One of the questions that I've been most commonly asked is, well, isn't in-person learning and teaching what's best for students? Well, absolutely it is. I haven't talked to a single educator over the last several weeks who said, boy, I really think I did my best work last spring. That's simply not where we are. But we can't have that conversation in a vacuum. We need to make sure that when we're having that conversation, we're recognizing that there is a pandemic, that there are safety concerns, and our schools can't be a public health experiment this coming fall. We need to ensure that there's safety. I think that the data certainly suggests that if schools were to open for some sort of in-person learning, some students, educators, and family members will contract the virus. They'll get sick. Some will recover, others won't. And that's simply nothing that we can stand for. We have a way to protect the health and safety of students and educators and families and communities. And we must do that right now. As I said earlier, we needed to be putting these plans in place yesterday. We can't wait, and we'll ensure that, as we move forward, that WEA is going to do everything that we can to support locals in promoting the safety of their students. And one last thing I just want to put out there as well. There is something that every single Washingtonian can do to help get our students back into school as soon as possible. And we need to wear masks. We need to practice social distancing. And as we've seen, I've seen this in my community, it's just not happening as frequently as it needs to. So everyone who's on here right now, and I think we have over 2,000 or around 2,000 people, please, 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 this is my ask of you. Do what you can within your communities to get your students back to school as soon as possible. And that's to prevent the spread of this.
Okay, I think that is it for the meeting. And Sam, if you want to put that slide back up, feel free to ask extra questions. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. We really appreciate it. And thank you especially to every member who tuned in and who came. And we know that these are really, really uncertain times. So thanks for sticking with it. And together we will move forward.